Hi there, everyone. My name is May Elliott, and I'm the Marketing Assistant at NewCloud Networks. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar, Why Office 365 Backup is Essential for Remote Workers, brought to you by NewCloud Networks and Veeam. So today you're going to hear from myself as well as Michael Deemer, a Veeam Solutions Engineer. If at any time during the webinar you have a question, please use the question feature on your screen. All questions will be addressed at the end. And without further ado, I will go ahead and dive in. So we've got a great agenda for today. First, we're going to level set with what we're currently seeing in the market and take a look at some growth numbers. Then we're going to dive straight into the reasons why an Office 365 backup is so important. We'll then look at the shared responsibility model. What is your responsibility when it comes to protecting your Office 365 data? We'll also be doing a deep dive into the retention policies that come out of the box in Office 365. And then from there, we'll take a look at how Veeam addresses Office 365 data protection and show how it works with a demo. And then we'll wrap it up with a quick overview on NewCloud Networks and a Q&A. And with that, I will now turn it over to Michael.
Thank you very much, May. Welcome everybody in. I do want to thank you for coming out this morning, this afternoon, and joining me. So we're going to be kind of going over a very deep dive, exactly what May was talking about, all those different reasons that we were going to be touching on here today. So let's actually just see if I got presented right. Let's see here. Maybe. 1 second. Let's see. There we go. Perfect. All right. So let's just start with kind of the basics, since everything has been moving the way it's been moving, and the world has been moving the way it has been as well. So Microsoft Teams has been one of the fastest growing applications or processes that most clients and partners are actually going to. With a little over 258 million Office 365 users, that's nothing to scoff at. Also alone, just 115 million active Microsoft Teams. And that's also being used more and more every single day. Within the last 6 months, we've seen a 50% growth increase, which is huge for any type of particular asset or application inside of that environment. Now, with that being said, there's 91% of Fortune 500 companies are actually using Teams. So this is a very widespread data analysis, right? Now, what else I really want to get into here is actually here. Let's see if I can. It's a little slow. Let's try it one more time. There we go. Awesome. All right, cool. So next, I really want to talk about some remote workers and why they're at risk. So before everything happened, we were mostly at home, or mostly in the office, behind firewalls and VPNs, and a lot of companies actually put stuff in the DMZ, and it was proper networking, right? Now with everybody moving at home, most people don't have Cisco firewalls or even any type of real actual enterprise grade firewall, and most people are using just the home router and modem that comes from the local ISP. Those are not always the most secure and most protected way to do things. And then you also are seeing more and more people connecting to public internet, which is, just to be brutally honest, a breeding ground of attacks. You're leaving yourself open for a lot of different things because of how the traffic is flowing, and you have no controllability over it. Not to mention security patches. Most of us here know that either Windows, Linux, or even Mac all have security patches that come, at least every month, if not a couple of times a month. And sometimes, depending on the organization, you might not be able to get patches to these remote devices. Maybe that secure server can't push out patches to every single IP address, or it's just not set up foundationally like that. So that's going to be really, really a part of why I'm saying remote workers at risk, because we're really not set up like we were 6-8 months ago. Now, with that being said, let's actually kind of talk about the 6 reasons why Office 365 and having a backup for that protection or that particular data set is so mission critical to everyday needs. So let's just kind of look at a couple of these. Accidental deletion. I know for a fact that if I had a piece of data or a data set that I accidentally deleted, I know I can go back in time historically or to that point in time state and get that back with Veeam. But if you didn't have that, you're relying on O365, which I'll get into just in a minute of what they actually cover and what they don't cover. And I'll show that in very, very grand scale. But just know that you have a lot of accidental deletion gaps. And that kind of leads me right into retention policy and confusing gaps there. So a lot of times they think, oh, well, O365, since I'm up in the cloud or up in the on-prem or up in the cloud, I'm protected. All my data is protected. That is their mantra, but that's actually not right. They do, to a certain degree, advise that they are going to secure the server. They're going to make sure that the make pipe's there. They're going to make sure that you can log in. But the data at the end of the day is still yours. And that's where retention policy gaps kind of really come into play. Now, internal threats, malicious insiders or departing employees, right? So if you had a rogue admin or anything that had a high enough security clearance or credentials to get in, an internal security threat is probably one of the most scariest way to do that. If you don't have a backup to revert back to, you're really putting yourself in a really sticky situation here. Now, next is going to be external security threats, which we talk about all the time with ransomware, malware, just exploits in general. That's where these external security threats are coming in. And most of the time, and we'll get into more of the statistics here, but most of the time, external security threats are really targeting your email. They're trying to get your information. They're trying to make sure that if they do target you, you are a valuable asset that they actually want to keep and try to get some monetary value out of. Now, moving into legal and compliance requirements. O365, again, only has a very short window for data that it's actually backing up and keeping there for you. If you have HIPAA compliance, DOD, DOJ, any type of long-term compliancy, that is not going to be protected within just the regular scope of O365. You're really going to need to keep that data for long, long periods of time and off-site locations just to make sure that there is no accidental deletion or a security threat, internal or external. Now, let's talk about a little bit about where most people are coming from. I would even say over the last year and a half, people have been really diverting away from their on-prem servers and moving to the cloud optimal space, so more of an OpEx model. So if you're still in between, if you're deploying, if you're moving from your on-prem to hybrid or to Office 365, we can help with that migration, really allowing for that really smooth transition. There's a lot of stuff that we can kind of do there. Now, the next couple things I really want to touch on way too fast. All right, so next thing I really want to touch on is, so how often do these really happen? So exploits, ransomware, deletion, all that kind of stuff is all breaking down for us here. So user accidental deletion, which has the highest percentage, is at 37%. So just really want to phone that home or drive that home that the more that accidental deletion or user error there is, and you don't have a software that can go back in time to a point in time state or even to a day that has that particular data set, you're really setting yourself up for failure. Now, next is going to be the actual malicious actors, ransomware, malware, exploits. That's going to be coming in at 18%. And just right next to that is right on par with retention policy gaps, thinking that they're protected when realistically they're not. And some of our next slides here are really going to show you those retention policy gaps between O365 and Veeam. And then you have 20% that just doesn't use it. And then there's a 6% gap that's in another particular market. Now, 76 of businesses are left unprotected. There's a lot of data sets here, but I really want to drive home that we don't back up. So some of these data sets here is we rely on Microsoft native tools for backing up and recovery, 19%. That's pretty high. They're leaving themselves, or that 19% of that particular model is leaving themselves pretty vulnerable, because I'll kind of show you that here in the next slides of, again, what Office protects compared to what Veeam protects. Now, going into, we don't even back up O365 data. Most people have this particular mindset because of those retention gaps and those retention policies that they think that O365 is protecting them regardless. And then you always have your manual copy onto on-prem. So you have your on-premise still. That's very low. That number used to be quite large. Now we're only at 2% of actually on cloud or on a data center. Now, going back a little down here is we use Veeam for Microsoft Office, 10%, good there. And then we use another software as a solution, 5%, third party, 3%, and then another third party backup solution, 4%. All right, so why do we need a backup Office 365? Most people think, or most clients, partners, and tenants think that O365 is taken care of. Not just the infrastructure, but also the data that resides in there. But let's be a little more realistic here. This is realistically how it's broken down. Uptime, infrastructure, making sure that you can sign in, that kind of stuff, that's absolutely Microsoft Office is going to be taken care of. However, your data, your personal integrity, your guys' data set, those are actually your responsibility. And it actually states it right on Microsoft's responsibility page. So again, really want to drive this home is Microsoft does take care of a lot of different things: infrastructure, signing in, resources, servers that you can talk, geo redundancy, stuff like that. However, your data, not so much. Now, let's talk about this and just really break it down on a very high level. Now, we have your on-prem responsibility support, and then we'll kind of go through all of this here. All right, so let's kind of talk about where to Microsoft and where does your responsibility break down. So again, infrastructure that we talked about, yes. Now, let's talk about geo-redundancy. I kind of touched on that just a little bit. So data center to data center. So they're going to make sure if a data center goes down or the closest to you goes down, that they have a geo-redundant data center for you guys to phone back to. That way you can always get your mail. So think of uptime. Making sure that if you have to go log in to get this piece of mail that you know is there, it's going to be there. Now, recycle bin. So this is, and I'll show you that here on a slide really, really close, but there is a limited short amount of time, but there is no point in time recovery. Now, again, what are they good for? Security, physical, logical, app security, API, those credentials, that particular environment, you're not going to be able to touch. But let's move into roles and the data processing. So they're going to be able to keep the compliancy for HIPAA. They're going to get all the industry standards and certifications. So they're the ones that's getting that umbrella. But again, your responsibility is your data. Backing up your O365 data and storing it on a different location, 100% your guys' responsibility model, and making sure that you have a secondary copy is going to be a key for success. Full-time data retention. So making sure that you have all those retention gaps actually filled in, and making sure that you know exactly where this particular software picks up and where this one begins is going to be mission critical for, again, keeping those data sets and keeping those data sets live for actually going back and quick restores. Now, where do we come in for the data? So we're going to make sure that there's no accidental deletion, malicious insiders, employee retaliation, or evidence tampering. Right? Somebody gets inside of your O365 tenant and they start wreaking havoc, making sure, again, that these things can happen, right? So ransomware, malware, hackers, rogue apps, APIs going crazy inside of there. All has been done before, and making sure that we have an offsite data location in your data. Absolutely key. All right, so let's actually move on here. So Office, this is actually the shared responsibility model here. Without a backup for your Office 365 data, what are you leaving vulnerable, right? Limit to access control of your own data, exposure, security vulnerabilities, and retention policy gaps. I'm not going to dig into that too much just because I've been harping on it already. All right, so let's look at the actual retention policy gaps from Microsoft Office 365. Inbox or folder data, you're going to be able to keep for a little over the 2-year mark. So actually within your inbox. Now, anything deleted through your deleted items, archive, deleted SharePoint, deleted OneDrive, employee leaves the company. Guess what? You got 1 week. That's it. Anything that you move to recycle bin, same thing, 1 week. So you're moving that data out of your on-prem box. You're not going to have very much time with that data. Anytime it's moved or allocated to a different resource, again, not going to be in your live email box. Again, making that data retention very, very short and sweet. Now, this is the O365. you're going to see that it's permanently deleted. You're going to have maybe some second stages, and then it's going to be moving to archive. But let's show you what the Veeam side looks like. So this is just saying on average, the length of data compromised is around 140 days, but your defaults are set to 30 and 90. So by the time that you reached or actually got aware of some compromise or that data has been gone or misled, it's too late. It's now at that 140-day mark on average, right? And then you realistically only have something that covers your back from Office from 30 to 90 days. Now, comparatively that to Veeam, that's way, way different. We don't care where it is in the deleted archive SharePoint. Anything that you have, we're going to be able to keep for forever, realistically. If you said, hey, I want to keep all of my Office 365 data with NewCloud Networks forever, we could do that. Absolutely. And the same thing with archive, deleted on SharePoint, Teams, etc. We can keep it for as long as your particular retention allows for, or whatever you guys are wanting. All right, so the number one backup recovery from Microsoft Office, Veeam backup from Microsoft Office 365. All right, so let's actually get into this. Veeam backup from Microsoft Office 365. What is it doing? It's protecting Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, and Microsoft Teams. So what we can do is to securely back this up to any location, including on-prem servers. So if you wanted to go from Azure back to on-prem, or even from Azure to NewCloud, you could do that. Just really kind of depends of what you're really trying to do. Now, what we're doing is protecting against accidental deletion, security threats, and retention policy gaps with quick restore of individual files. And what we do that by is actually explorers, which I'll show you here a little bit, and then I'll actually get into the demo lab and actually show you what's that and how to do things. And then meeting legal and compliance requirements. Huge, especially for certain clients that need to meet those particular thresholds. All right, so how it works. So this is really going to break it down to a very high level of architecture, but let me kind of go over this, and then we'll get into the lab here in just a second. So let's make sure this is all the way out. All right, perfect. Oh, that's not what I want. All right, so as you see here on the left-hand side, this is Veeam for Microsoft Office 365. Now above it, you have Office 365. Now below, this is just if you had an on-prem server doing SharePoint and Exchange, right? Now, we have a couple different ways that we can do this. Doesn't really matter if you're coming from on-prem or if you're fully up in the cloud. We can still have this middle ground or this middle server that can do both. Now, depending where we want to back up, we can back up to a whole bunch of different places. We can back up to object storage. We can even back to local on-prem storage, just dependent on what we're trying to do here. Now, just to mention, we could also go to NewCloud in this particular model as well. And then we have some recovery options. So most of the recovery options, or all the recovery options, I should say, are done via an Explorer. So the Explorers are how you pull your data out. It's a self-restore portal. So basically, you go in there, pick up the piece of data set that you need, verify it, and then push it back to where it was needed. And I'll kind of show you that here on the lab. But the biggest things that you're going to be able to do is restoring it, sending it back, saving it, export as a PST, export as a message file. And then you also have your self-restore service portal via a service provider. So if you do tend to go with the NewCloud, they can set you up with a service provider console. That way you can do your self-restore for Office 365. All right, so there is over 40 new options with actually backing up for Microsoft Office 365. So a lot of these are actually the restore. I'm not going to get into every one of these, but as you can see here, there is a ton, from message files to PSTs, just from actually moving things around inside of the tenant to object storage. We can even go to HTML as a zip file, as an attachment, message file. There's a whole bunch of different things. We can even restore channel to the original location. We can even restore changed or missing items and files, right? Again, tons of stuff here, and I'll be able to show you that live here in the lab. I think that's what we're coming up to here next. All right. Actually, let's go back one, maybe. There we go. Oh, perfect. Let me show out my screen, and then we will be doing the actual demo today. Let's make sure that that's shown out. May, could you just let me know that if you guys could see my screen? That'd be greatly appreciated.
Yep, I can see it.
Perfect, perfect. All right, so the very first thing I want to start with is this is Office 365, but let's actually talk a little bit about resources. Let's talk about where it lives, and the more of the techie side. So this is going to be more on the technical side, but let's kind of dig right into it. So very first thing is, where can this server live? It does need to be a Windows Server 2008 R2 SP1 or above. Now, the newer flavor of Windows, the better off we are. Now, that is the oldest one we'll go back to, is 2008 R2 SP1. Now, on resources, we're not a resource pig whatsoever. We're talking about 4 cores, 8 gigs of RAM, and a 500 meg install file to get you this pretty user interface that you see here today. Now, there is a couple architecture components that we really need to go over first. All these architecture components can actually live on the same server, and most of the time, I would say a good percentage of the time, they actually do. So let's actually jump right into the backup infrastructure. The backup infrastructure is some of the infrastructure pieces that we're needing to actually build out this server. So the very first thing I really want to touch on is the proxy. So when you hear Veeam and you hear proxy for O365, think of, and I'll kind of show it down here, think of actual threads. And when you're thinking of a thread, think more granularly SharePoint, Exchange, Teams, OneDrive. But more granularly, if you thought about like an Exchange server, for instance, and you were looking at your inbox, every particular line item or granular line item inside your inbox, so every piece of mail, is considered a thread. And we're going to be processing 64 threads in a batch. So it's going to go out, batch those 64, move those to the corresponding repository, come back, batch the next 64, and then move those accordingly as well. So that's really what I really want to drill home today, is the number of threads. And also, when you think of proxies, think of the muscle behind Veeam. So this is the guy that's moving the data, churning the data, and also moving it wherever it's correspondingly needed. Now, the next biggest thing that we're going to need, this is the first architecture component. This is going to be the second. There's only 3 really main ones. So the next one's going to be the actual repository. Now, kind of dependent on what we're going to do, right? So if you want to go land in object storage, you definitely can. Or if you want to land on-prem. The reason I'm showing you out the on-prem one is because it also shows out object storage as well. So on-prem repository, if you wanted to land that way, right? Name and description. Now, this is the proxy going out and processing the data. And now, this is the local path. So since this is an on-prem path, this is actually a local path that we're going to browse to. Now, let's just say that you also wanted to go off to object storage. You could do that. You could go up here and just say, I want to go off to object storage. I want to offload this backup data to object storage. You click this. One of the big things that I like to harp on is encryption, encryption, encryption. So anytime that you're leaving O365 or even your on-prem data center or your on-prem Office 360 or not Office 365 server, your Office server or SharePoint server, encryption, encryption, encryption. We use AES 256-bit. It just protects your data chain while floating against the wire. Now, next is going to be our retention policy. So what I was talking about a little earlier. So we can protect from anything from 1 year to 25 years or forever. It really depends on how long you want to keep your data. If you just want to keep your data forever and ever, you can do that. Now, we have 2 different types of retention policies as well. So we have item level retention and snapshot-based retention. Snapshot-based retention is most commonly what everybody is used to, but we also do have item level retention. So item level retention kind of works in the following. So let's just pretend we want to keep the data for 10 years. Okay, that's completely fine. And we're going to use item level retention. Item level retention is going to go back. Once we do the first backup, so your very first backup with Veeam is always a full backup. Now, after this, it's going to be a forever forward incremental. Now, why is it a forever forward incremental? It's because it's actually Office 365 is an open database. So we actually don't need to go back and do a whole bunch of checksums. Now, with that being said, we do have a 10-year, so I did select a 10-year retention policy. So after that first backup, Veeam's going to go back and say, all right, so we have a full backup. Now next is going to be an incremental. Now once that incremental goes through, it's actually going to go look and say who's older than 10 years. If there's data sets that are older than 10 years, those data sets or pieces of mail, OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, etc., are going to be moved out of the backup because they don't meet the retention policy. So think of this as auto pruning. Think of this as snapshot based. All right, so that's going to be the 2 biggest things there. So backup repository and then backup proxies. Last thing I really want to touch on is the organization or the tenant itself. So adding in the organization is super, super easy here. So these are all actually independent tenants. So we have an on-prem Exchange, we have an on-prem SharePoint, but we also have an O365 one here as well. So we can go up here and say add organization, or we can just come here into the editor one we already have. Now, this is just picking out the deployment type that we want to work with. If you want to have O365 and that's where your particular data set lives, awesome. You're just going to be picking out the services that you want to protect. So if you don't want a backup Exchange, you wouldn't do that. And just going down, these are all the not the explorers, but these are all the data sets that you want to target. Now, next is actually going to be the region, right? So depending on what's actually going on. So we have basic authentication and then modern authentication. Basic authentication is just username, password, granting roles and permissions to SharePoint and OneDrive. Next is going to be modern authentication, which I'm going to say I'm going to push a little more towards, just for the biggest reason of they're actually going to be getting rid of, and when I say Microsoft's going to be getting rid of basic authentication in 2021. So that way you're ahead of the curve if you run with modern authentication. One, it's a little more secure in tying to the tenant. Now, you're going to need application ID, secret, and certificate. Same thing, username and password, granting roles and permissions to SharePoint and OneDrive for the actual thread. Now, those were the three architecture components, right? So we had the proxy, we had the repository, and then we also had the organization, so the tenant itself. Now we have all three of those organization or architecture pieces actually inputted. The next thing we really need to do is set up a job. So this is the job itself. So we'll just come up here and we'll edit this guy. So name and description of actually what's going on, right? And then going back here, we have a couple different ways, and this is where we can really start to step it up and get granular. So we can do and back up the entire organization. And when I mean back up the entire organization, I truly mean the entire organization. SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, Exchange, like literally everything, every data store that we can touch, we're going to be able to pull from just that one particular button. And then you can go next, finish, or you could even have a little more of a granular look at this as well. So you could come here and say, hey, I only want to do it by users, group, site, teams, or organization. For this particular one, I'm just going to show you how, if you have some VIP users or some C-level employees, you could actually come up here and actually specify them to have a different interval than other users. So let's just say for Mr. Gray here, I really only care about his mail. Everything else he doesn't contribute to. But on this one, Mrs. Jamie, she really contributes to OneDrive and SharePoint sites really heavy. So I really want to make sure that I'm getting those on a different interval. And then Mr. John Snow, he just likes to delete things, and we really only care about his mail and his archive because he does a lot of resource, right? So this is going to be a different interval because he likes to lose mail every couple of days. Now, next is going to be all the exclusions. So all the exclusions here are basically all the admin accounts or any account that you actually don't want to have a backup of. This is where you're going to add that in. So again, service accounts or local accounts that you just don't want to have, dev accounts, that kind of thing. Next is going to be the proxy. So again, when you think of proxy, you think of the muscle behind Veeam. And then here's the backup repository. So this is actually directly landing onto Azure Blob. So as you can see here, we can land on the Amazon S3, or we can just go back to on-prem. Really kind of depends what we're looking to do. Now, this is last but definitely not least. So this is going to be how often the job runs. So this job is actually running every single day at 8 p.m. Now, you may say, well, that's all fine and dandy, but I actually want to get a little more granular. I want to run my backup every 5 minutes. You can do that. You could run it from every 5 minutes to every 8 hours, really depending on what you're trying to accomplish, or how often or how many intervals you want to have of your O365 data. Now, you do also have the retry process here as well. So you're going to have 3 attempts, and there's going to be 10 minutes in between each attempt. On that third attempt, it's going to sever the job and then send you a report via SMTP, allowing for you to actually know what's actually going on and why things fail inside the environment. Now, one of the last things I really want to touch on after the architecture pieces is going to be the explorers. So these explorers are actually how we pull the data out. As you see here, we have 2 explorers per item. So we have Exchange, we have an Exchange point in time, we have SharePoint, 2 for SharePoint, 2 for OneDrive, and 2 for Teams. So if you notice, this is actually the last time the backup was taken, or you can do the point in time state. I like doing the point in time state because you just get a little more grainability out of it. So let's just say we'll choose the point in time state that we want to roll back to. And if you wanted to, we can actually roll back to, let's just do June 1st, right? Now we can also show some e-discovery settings. So showing what has been deleted or modified, and that is actually technically no longer actually present in the selected state, right? All right, so let's finish this. You're going to see an error here. This really truly is an error. What this is saying is right now we're browsing metadata. So all this data sets down here, this is all technically metadata that we can browse. The reason that we like to keep metadata on-prem is for things like this. So when you come here to browse or you come here to search through e-discovery, we can say, hey, and if you're storing, and this really makes sense if you're with object storage or any type of storage that's going to charge you for ingress or degress, this is really going to be a key for making sure those monetary values can drop just a little bit. All right, so advanced find, think of this as e-discovery. So this is e-discovery on demand. So this is going to be looking at your repositories and then whatever's in there for O365 and doing a search query. So if you're going back or you have Mr. John Snow, like I had earlier, he likes to delete his email. You can go back in here and say, hey, I'm looking for maybe X, Y, and Z, and actually have some of these search parameters that we can actually do it. And there's tons of different things that we can really phone in on. So we can say optional, another address, and there's tons of fields that we can do it by there as well. Now, what do we have inside of here? So the actual restoring process, or in the tenant side. Now, over the entire tenant itself, so this is the O365 tenant, if you needed to, you could take a PST and actually take a long-term PST for this particular entire Office 365 server. Same thing here, you could take a PST. Now, going down here into some user accounts. Here's the user account. We're going to capture their archive, calendar, contact, conversation history. It's going to be Teams chat, deleted items, permanent deleted items, and then more importantly, what do we actually get back? So what kind of data sets can we get back? Now, this is really cool because we can actually open and view the data set. So if this is not the particular data set that's needed, maybe it's this one. Nope, maybe not. Let's actually just go down here to maybe Mr. Gray Worm and see what he has in his. So they didn't have very many data sets, but maybe this does. So perfect. This is the perfect data set, or maybe this is a perfect data set. Again, this is making sure that we're browsing this particular data before actually pushing it back out. So let's actually open this, right? Boom. We know that it's working. All right, so this is the piece of data set we're needing. So we have two different options. We have option A to restore it. We can restore it right back to Mr. Gray Worm, or we can restore it back to multiple different users. Now, we have the same thing here. We can either send it right back or send it to multiple different users. Now, you may be saying, Mike, what's the difference between the two? Well, the biggest difference is this is going to put it back in chronological order. So if this piece of mail was from November of last year or January of this year, guess what? It's going to go back and put it back in chronological order. Comparatively to sending it back is just going to put it to the top of the email, just like a new piece of mail. So those are the two biggest differences. Now, let's talk about offboarding some clients and just making a PST file or a message file. How easy it is to do that. We can export to desktop, the inbox, right? We can export as a PST. We can save to the desktop, or we can save as a message file. So it's very derivative of what we're trying to do and what we're trying to capture, but we're making it very, very easy for those data sets to be captured and moved around accordingly. Now, that's going to be O365. I'm going to show out the SharePoint one. Actually, let's share out the Teams one since this is brand new. We just had version 5 be released. So again, it's the same thing here, just saying that we're browsing metadata, nothing crazy. So this is actually going to be the Explorer for Teams. All right, so go down here and let's actually kind of pull up some of these posts and files and all that good stuff. So let's talk about this one. So if you needed to, so here's Mr. John Snow, right? If you need to, you can open and view it just like you normally could with the other Explorers. We can export to the desktop, or we can export to multiple different users, save to the desktop, save as a message file, again, or sending it back. It's really kind of dependent on what we're trying to do. Again, so it's very derivative of what we're trying to get out of this. The same thing here. We want to open and view the history. We want to restore the file. We want to save it, save as a file, save as zip, or send it back. We can do that as well. So you do have your advanced find just like you normally would have. You have the history, basically going back in chronological order and showing you what's actually going on the history tab. You can also restore it, save it, or send it right from up here. Just very dependent on what you're trying to do here. All right, so the last one that I'll kind of show out is going to be for SharePoint. SharePoint and OneDrive are realistically very same. Same thing with Teams as well. They kind of all go hand in hand. But again, you're going to be able to get that message. It's really truly not an error message, just saying we're browsing metadata. All right, and here's the same thing for SharePoint. So we have the same particular schema for SharePoint, Exchange, OneDrive, and Teams. Going down here, let's just actually get into this particular subsite. Let's see what kind of data sets are in these. All right, so let's see if you have any good data sets. Okay, maybe. Somewhere around here there has to be some data sets. Okay. Come on. Any documents? Nothing? Maybe I'll just move away from those. Those don't look like they have anything. Where's all my data? Okay, there we go. This I know has data. There we go. All right, so again, open and viewing the history. If you want to restore it, just like you typically could in any other Explorer, you're going to be able to do that as well. You can also send it as a file, send it as a zip, save the document, or viewing the properties. I really like viewing the properties. This is probably one of the most favorite things I like to do, especially on Exchange and then SharePoint sites, because you get so much grainability out of it. So you can see inherited permissions, when was it modified, who modified it last, when was it actually, what version we're on, right? So this is very huge for trying to revert back to just one version or a dot ago, right? So a different version. Is it checked in or is it checked out? Where's the source at, right? Is it in the child or the parent folder? This is just kind of more of the architecture. And then retention, you're going to be able to see in there as well. That's going to be more inside of that particular environment, would be exactly what you would be able to see there. So that's kind of O365 in a nutshell. I hope everybody had a good experience there and learned a lot from that particular live demo. I'm going to be passing this back over to one of our Platinum VCSP partners, May, and she'll be able to take it over from here. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. All right. Okay, so I want to take a step back quickly and give you some context of who NewCloud is for those of you who might be unfamiliar with us. So we're a cloud services provider that's been in business since 1988. Obviously, we weren't in cloud back then or called NewCloud, but that would have been some tremendous foresight. Our background is in networking, and we've evolved several times over the years to adjust our offerings according to the changes in technology. And as such, we've amassed over 1,000 customers in the US and in Europe. And we're also platinum level partners with Veeam, and we were one of the first partners to launch Cloud Connect with Veeam. So we've built a reputation for quality within our industry, and our SLA and customer satisfaction rating do a great job of exemplifying that. All right, so this map is a breakdown of our nationwide ultra-low latency cloud network. This network is designed and built for backup and disaster recovery. So when we talk about backup and disaster recovery, it's important to have your data far enough away from your main site so that it won't be affected by the same natural disaster, but it's close enough so that it's usable when you actually need to stand up the VMs. And then we control the bandwidth and latency between all of these locations to ensure that the customer's data is always usable. So if your company is hit by ransomware, this means that we can get your data backups and replicas back to you quickly, which eliminates downtime. We work hand in glove with Veeam to bring our customers best-in-breed solutions. So we have a variety of Veeam offerings that we support. Our engineers are Veeam certified, and they implement technology fast. We offer the full suite of Veeam backup and disaster recovery services. At NewCloud, we believe that great technology is powered by great people. We're always being asked what sets us apart from the likes of Amazon and Microsoft, and our answer is always the same. We believe in personalized service, not a 1-800 number. Our customers can rest assured that we have top engineers available to them 24/7, 365 days a year to help. And we know that no two companies are the same, so we don't believe in cookie-cutter cloud solutions. And we work closely with our customers to ensure we develop solutions that address their core business needs. We implement these solutions using best-in-breed technology solutions and are able to provide our solutions at an affordable price. The bottom line basically is that we believe in taking care of our customers. I want to thank everyone for joining the webinar today. I hope you learned a lot about Office 365 Backup and why it's so essential to your remote workforce. The most important thing to remember is that it is your data and your responsibility to protect it. Microsoft will not be there to rescue you should you face data loss. So what's next? Well, you've heard a lot about NewCloud and Veeam, and we'd love to talk to you about your unique business needs and understand how we can help. Please take a look at the asset that we have available for you here on the webinar today, 6 critical reasons for Office 365 Backup. It's really a great summation of what we've discussed here today. We also have a free trial available for those of you who are interested in kicking the tires and testing out the features of our backup service. And always, you can reach out to Michael or myself with any questions you might have after this webinar. And with that in mind, I'd like to invite you guys to use the question feature and submit any questions you might have for Michael or myself.
May, was there any questions that came in during the actual webinar?
No, I'm not seeing any, but we can discuss some other stuff. So
Absolutely.
Just to toggle back with you, Michael, so I'm sure some people would probably be curious of how you back up Microsoft Teams information.
Absolutely. Very, very good question. So Microsoft Teams, along with Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive, we're going to be targeting on the user level. Now, what sits behind those particular users are going to be the data stores that are adjusted for this particular data set. And we're actually be targeting the data stores that are adjusted or that are implemented for those particular users. So we're actually targeting on a user basis, but we're also targeting the data stores that reside behind the scenes in Azure.
Perfect. Perfect. So, and then can Office 365 Backup be installed on a virtual machine?
Yeah, very, very good question. So yes, absolutely. It can be installed on a virtual machine. It just needs to be running Windows 2008 R2 SP1 or above. But yes, absolutely, physical or virtual. Doesn't really matter there.
Gotcha. Perfect. And then is backup for Office 365 built into Veeam backup and replication?
That is also a very, very good question. So as of right now, no, they are 2 separate products and 2 separate ISOs or MSI files. So you're going to have one for your architecture, so your actual virtual machines, your workloads there, and then all your physical presence will have to be done through Veeam backup and replication. And then your Office 365 data or any of that particular data set will be done in that particular server, but they can live on the same server if needed, as long as they're not competing for resources.
Wonderful, awesome. And then we have another question. Can I run Veeam backup for Office 365 and Veeam backup and replication on the same server?
Yeah, absolutely. So as long as those two applications aren't fighting for resources, and there's enough resources that, they're not competing, and there's not going to be a degradation in the backup times and stuff like that. Yeah, absolutely. There's no harm, no foul into doing that. And obviously, the more of a large scale environment, you'll just have to deploy more proxies. But yes, that absolutely can be done.
Awesome. And then how long can I keep my data in storage with NewCloud Networks? So that's forever. There's no limit on that. And then
Absolutely.
We've got one last question. How easy is it to restore a OneDrive folder?
That is super, super easy. So it's just via done one of those explorers, going down, figuring out what data set you need, verifying that's the right data set, and then restoring it either chronologically or sending it right back to the user. Kind of just depends what you're wanting to do.
Awesome. We also have somebody that they said they joined late. Is there any on-prem copy of this backup?
No. So I guess if you were shooting the backup to on-prem, then yes. But if you're shooting the backup or moving the backup to object storage, or it's landing with NewCloud, it's not going to come back on-prem and then go off to object storage. It's just going to directly go over there. Now, if you wanted two different spots for data, maybe that's how I'm kind of interpreting this question. If you wanted some to live on-prem and then another piece of data set to live in object storage, you could absolutely do that. It's just going to be two separate jobs to get that particular function done.
Perfect. I don't see any more questions coming in. We'll give you maybe a moment just if you would like to submit another question. But otherwise, yeah, we thank you so much, you guys, for attending today's webinar. And if you have any questions, that come up in your mind, feel free to reach out to Michael or myself.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much.